We hear the term fake news constantly these days. It has become this um, catch-all phrase for everything from algorithmic bias to, actual disinformation campaigns.
Right. It feels like a strictly modern problem.
Exactly, something born out of the internet age. But what if I told you that one of the most sophisticated, high-functioning engines of fake news wasn't a glitch in an algorithm, but a formalized, highly secret government program?
And we aren't talking about some fringe theory here. We're talking about a documented, funded operation at the height of the Cold War.
That's it. We're transporting ourselves back to the late 1940s and 50s. The world is divided, tensions are nuclear, and the CIA decides that the battlefield isn't just land, sea, and air.
It's the front page of your morning newspaper.
Today, we are completely unpacking Operation Mockingbird.
It is a chilling chapter in American history, honestly. Operation Mockingbird was this secret campaign by the CIA to influence domestic and foreign media.
And when you say influence, we're not talking about sending out press releases.
Oh no, we're talking about recruiting the absolute biggest names in journalism to fight what they called a secret war of ideas.
The scale of this is what really blew my mind when we were going through the sources. So we're going to trace how this started, how the CIA managed to recruit trusted voices at institutions like the Washington Post and CBS.
And crucially, how it all came crashing down. We'll be pulling from declassified documents, the famous Church Committee reports from the 70s, and historical exposés like those in Ramparts magazine.
So grab your trench coat and your notepad. We're following the paper trail.
To really understand Mockingbird, you have to get into the mindset of 1948. The war is over, but a new, colder war is starting. And there's one man at the center of this web.
Frank Wisner. He's the architect here.
Right. In 1948, Wisner was appointed director of the Office of Special Projects. Now, almost immediately, they realized that name sounded a bit too
ominous.
Yeah, exactly. So they renamed it the Office of Policy Coordination, or OPC.
Which sounds incredibly bureaucratic and boring. Policy coordination. It sounds like they organize filing cabinets.
And that was the whole point. But Wisner's mandate was anything but boring. The charter for the OPC gave him authority to conduct propaganda, economic warfare, sabotage, and subversion against hostile states.
I want to stick on that word subversion for a second. That is a heavy, heavy mandate for a government agency operating in peacetime.
It is. Wisner essentially believed that the Cold War wasn't just going to be about troops. It was a war for the minds of the world's population. He needed a way to control the narrative, globally.
He called it his mighty Wurlitzer.
Like the organ. The idea was that he could push a button in Washington, play a specific tune, and that tune would be heard in newspapers and radio stations all over the world.
But to build a Wurlitzer, you need pipes, you need speakers.
You need the press. And this is where the story gets, well, uncomfortable for anyone who romanticizes the golden age of journalism.
Because Wisner didn't just sneak spies into newsrooms.
No, he was invited in. He was a socialite, part of the Georgetown elite. In 1948, he approaches Philip Graham, the publisher of the Washington Post.
And Graham wasn't just a contact. He basically agreed to run the project from within the industry.
Graham was the anchor. He helped recruit others. And by the early 1950s, the sources say Wisner owned respected members of major outlets.
Owned them.
Yeah, and I think it's worth listing them because the scale is just, it's staggering.
Please do, because we're not talking about, small town tabloids here.
We are talking about the New York Times, Newsweek, CBS, Time and Life magazine, the Washington Star, and the Christian Science Monitor.
It's a who's who of mid-century media. And we have specific names of the tycoons involved, right?
We do. William S. Paley at CBS, Henry Luce, the man who built the Time Life empire, Arthur Hayes Sulzberger at the New York Times, Alfred Friendly at the Washington Post.
Okay, so the natural question here is, why? Why would these men, who are supposed to be guardians of the free press, hand the keys over to a spy agency?
You have to look at the context. These were men who were staunchly anti-Soviet. They believed they were helping their country win the Cold War.
They saw it as patriotic duty.
Exactly. If Frank Wisner told them, look, we need to plant this story to destabilize a communist uprising in Italy, they didn't see it as lying to their readers. They saw it as fighting the good fight.
So let's unpack how this actually worked day to day. I think people imagine a CIA agent in a trench coat whispering in a reporter's ear in a parking garage.
Sometimes it was that direct, but usually it was more systemic. They had a system of witting and unwitting reporters.
Okay, break that down for us. Witting versus unwitting.
A witting reporter is someone who knows exactly what's happening. They know the intelligence is coming from the CIA. They know the slant the agency wants, and they agree to write it. They're essentially operatives with a byline.
And the unwitting ones.
The unwitting ones are the useful tools. The CIA might leak a report to them, maybe a forged document or a selectively edited piece of intel. The reporter thinks, wow, I have a massive scoop.
And they think they're doing great journalism.
But really, they're just publishing exactly what Wisner wanted them to publish.
And this is where it gets really insidious, the echo chamber effect.
Yeah.
Because once that story is out, it doesn't just stay local.
Right. Let's say the CIA plants a story in a respected paper like the New York Times about political unrest in some country.
Okay.
Because it's in the Times, the wire services, AP, UPI, Reuters, they all pick it up.
And once it hits the wire?
It goes everywhere. Newspapers in London, Tokyo, Buenos Aires, they all reprint the wire story. So a narrative that was constructed in a CIA office in Langley becomes global truth within days.
It's the original viral fake news. But running an operation this massive, bribing journalists, funding papers, that can't be cheap. Where was the money coming from?
This is one of the more scandalous details we found. The Office of Policy Coordination was funded by siphoning off funds intended for the Marshall Plan.
Wait, the Marshall Plan? The money meant to rebuild Europe after World War II.
The very same. The counterpart funds. Some of that money was diverted to bribe journalists and publishers. It was a massive war chest used to buy influence.
And it wasn't just news, was it? This is the part that really surprised me. The operation extended into culture and arts.
It did. Wisner and his team, including key figures like Cordmeyer, who was Mockingbird's principal operative, they understood that culture shapes politics.
If you want to win the Cold War, you have to win the culture.
Precisely. A prime example is Animal Farm.
The George Orwell book, I remember reading that in high school. This is a pretty clear critique of the Soviet Union.
Exactly. And the CIA wanted to make sure that allegory reached a mass audience. So in 1954, Wisner arranged funding for the Hollywood animated production of Animal Farm.
So the CIA was essentially a movie producer.
In this case, yes. They wanted to ensure the film got made and that the anti-communist message was crystal clear. They saw it as a perfect weapon in the cultural Cold War.
They were also funding student organizations and magazines, right?
Yes, the National Student Association was a major front. And they funded literary journals like Encounter. They wanted to shape the intellectual environment of the West.
Make sure the next generation of thinkers was on their side.
Absolutely.
There's a quote from Thomas Braden, who was the head of the International Organizations Division, that I think perfectly captures the arrogance of this time.
I know the one. He confessed years later that there was simply no limit to the money they could spend. He said if the director of the CIA wanted to give $50,000 to a labor leader in Europe because he was doing a good job,
He could just hand it to him. No accountability. No paper trail.
none. He called it the secret war. And he admitted specifically that journalists and labor unions were the primary targets.
And the manpower involved.
By the 1950s, sources estimate some 3,000 salaried and contract CIA employees were engaged in propaganda efforts. That is a small army.
So you have this massive machine, the mighty Wurlitzer. But here's the twist that makes this story feel like a movie. The biggest threat to this operation wasn't the Soviets.
It was the FBI.
The rivalry between J. Edgar Hoover at the FBI and the CIA is just legendary.
Hoover was incredibly jealous of the CIA's growing power. He felt that domestic security was his turf, and he saw the CIA encroaching.
And culturally, they were very different organizations.
Very. The FBI was conservative, rigid, suit and tie. The CIA, specifically the OPC, was more, well, politically diverse, more intellectual. Hoover famously called the OPC Wisner's gang of weirdos.
Gang of weirdos, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But it got ugly fast. Hoover started feeding information to Senator Joseph McCarthy.
Right. McCarthy's on his crusade against communists in the government. Hoover realized he could use McCarthy as a weapon against the CIA.
So what did he do?
He found out that some of Wisner's operatives had past left-wing connections, which wasn't uncommon for intellectuals in the 30s, and he passed that info to McCarthy.
And he got personal, too.
Oh, yeah. Hoover dug up dirt on Frank Wisner's affair with a Romanian princess, Princess Karaja, claiming she was a Soviet agent.
Vicious. And McCarthy runs with it.
Of course.
Yeah.
He started calling the CIA a sinkhole of communists and promised to root out 100 of them. He even targeted Cordmeyer directly.
So how did the CIA respond? They didn't just sit back and take it.
No, they weaponized Mockingbird. Wisner essentially told his media assets, destroy McCarthy.
And looking at the names involved, it was a media blitz. Drew Pearson, Joe Alsop, Jack Anderson.
Walter Lippmann, even the legendary Ed Murrow, they unleashed a torrent of negative coverage. They painted McCarthy as dangerous, unhinged.
I mean, he was dangerous, but the coordination is the key here.
And it worked. But there was collateral damage. Jack Anderson later admitted that his political reputation was permanently damaged because he allowed himself to be used by Wisner.
It really shows the double-edged sword here. They used the tool to take down a demagogue, which many would say was a good thing, but the method, secretly manipulating the press, was deeply undemocratic.
That's the core tension. And it wasn't just for domestic fights. They used it to suppress news about what they were doing abroad.
Right, we have to talk about the coups, Guatemala and Iran.
During Operation Ajax in Iran and Operation PBS Success in Guatemala, the CIA was overthrowing governments. Wisner and Allen Dulles, who was the CIA director by then, they actively constrained newspapers from reporting on it.
There's a specific example of Dulles stopping a New York Times reporter, Sidney Grusin, from even traveling to Guatemala.
Exactly. They knew Grusin might uncover the truth, that this wasn't a local uprising, but a CIA-orchestrated coup, so Dulles exerted pressure to keep him out.
Control the access, control the story.
If the reporter can't get there, the only information coming out is what the agency provides.
But they couldn't control everything forever.
Yeah.
There's a funny story from 1964 about a book called Invisible Government.
Yes, by David Wise and Thomas Ross. It exposed CIA coups and covert ops. The CIA actually considered buying up the entire printing of the book to keep it off the shelves.
Why didn't they? That seems like exactly the kind of thing they would do.
Random House, the publisher, simply pointed out that if the CIA bought all the books, they would just print a second edition.
It would just make the book a bestseller.
Supply and demand. It was a rare failure of censorship. But the real unraveling began in 1967. This is the turning point.
The Ramparts article.
Ramparts was a left-wing magazine, and they discovered that the CIA had been secretly funding the National Student Association. This was a huge breach of the front organizations.
How did the CIA react when they knew this story was coming?
Panic. Absolute panic. Desmond Fitzgerald, head of the Directorate for Plans, ordered a plan to neutralize the campaign.
And they put a guy named Edgar Applewhite on it.
And Applewhite later admitted some pretty dark stuff. He told an author, "I had all sorts of dirty tricks to hurt their circulation and financing. We had awful things in mind."
Awful things, why?
Some of which we carried off. They were willing to use blackmail, financial pressure, anything to stop Ramparts.
But they couldn't stop the leak.
No. In March 1967, Saul Stern wrote the article NSA and the CIA. It blew the lid off the front organizations. It named Cord Meyer. It exposed the funding of journals like Encounter. It was the loose thread that unraveled the whole sweater.
And this eventually led to the government finally investigating itself, the Church Committee in the mid-70s.
Senator Frank Church led the investigation. And the report they published in 1976 was damning. It revealed that the CIA maintained a network of several hundred foreign individuals just to influence opinion through covert propaganda.
And the cost.
Senator Church argued that misinforming the world cost American taxpayers an estimated $265 million a year.
$250 million a year in 1970s money spent on what was essentially fake news.
It forces you to ask, what was the return on investment? Did it win the Cold War? Or did it just erode trust in the very institutions they were trying to protect?
So after the Church Committee, things changed, or at least the policy changed on paper.
Right. In 1976, George H.W. Bush, who was then director of the CIA, announced a new policy. He stated, "The CIA will not enter into any paid or contract relationship with any full-time or part-time news correspondent accredited by any U.S. news service."
Okay, that sounds pretty definitive. No paid contracts. But
Yeah.
there's a but, isn't there?
There's always a nuance. In that same statement, Bush added that the CIA would continue to welcome the voluntary, unpaid cooperation of journalists.
So you can't be on the payroll. But if you want to help out your country by planting a story or sharing information, the door is still open.
Exactly. It shifted the relationship from employer-employee to something much more ambiguous.
So what does this all mean for us today? We started this deep dive talking about modern fake news.
I think the lesson of Operation Mockingbird is that information has always been a battlefield. We tend to think of the news as a mirror reflecting reality, but during the Cold War, it was often a painting commissioned and paid for by the state.
And it blurs the line between journalism and intelligence. If a journalist is voluntarily cooperating with an intelligence agency, Are they still a journalist? Or are they an operative?
That is the lingering question. The formal structure of Mockingbird, the paid salaries, the direct ownership of assets, that may have been dismantled in 76. But the relationship between power and the press, that's a dance that never really ends.
It certainly makes you read the morning headlines with a slightly more skeptical eye.
As well it should.
That is going to do it for this deep dive into Operation Mockingbird. From Frank Wisner's mighty Wurlitzer to the explosive revelations of the Church Committee.
It's a reminder that sometimes the most important stories are the ones about how the stories themselves are made.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for diving in with us. We'll see you next time.